What's up, everybody? Welcome into Highmark Stadium, where the Buffalo Bills just wrapped up their preseason schedule a little over an hour ago, losing 31-26 in an offensive explosion on the heels of that 9-3 game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm Matt Parrino. He's Ryan Talbot. This is the Shout Buffalo Bills football podcast. Little housekeeping before we get into the show. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the performances in this game and what they mean. Won't spend a ton of time on that, and then we'll really start to turn the picture towards Tuesday, 4 p.m., roster cutdown day. Brandon Beane has a big job waiting for him to get this thing down to 53 players. We'll get into that as well. We will talk about Tyler Bass. We got a comment here off the top, and maybe we'll start there because that might be what people are a little bit concerned about the most when looking at this roster, because Ryan, listen, this is going to be a team that plays close games this year. I think that they have a tough schedule. They have an offense that's going to be a little bit newer. They have some missing pieces on defense. Might take some time for them to gel. Tough early part of the schedule. They could be playing some one-score games, and they've been really good in those games over the last couple of years. But obviously, if you have a kicker who's not making kicks, that's a problem. We'll get into that in a second, though. August 31st, 1 week from today, right now, we will be at Wingnuts, 1402 Millersport Highway. It'll be our last live show before the regular season begins. So make sure you come out, hang with us. We'll talk some Bills. We'll have some drinks. We'll eat some wings. Scott Moranto says nothing better than shout while cutting the grass on a Saturday. My man, welcome in. He went right from the stadium because he sent me a picture with his little guy right outside the press box. We missed him. He's one of our insiders, and he's all the way home, and he's already getting to work on the yard. What a legend, Scott Moran.
Respect it quite a bit. Watch this game at home. I told you I lost my voice a little bit. I don't know what happened or how it happened, but pushing through. When you watch this game back, I think one or two guys put their final stamp, Matt, on a 53-man roster spot. I think there were a few players that proved their point in terms of a practice squad spot. But Tyler Bass, which the comments here, we've already seen a little bit of, he's probably the lead because his perfect preseason came to an end today.
Yeah, and I think with Bass, you see him go out to the 51-yarder, and what was alarming to me, I've been really paying attention to him this summer, where he's kicking from and where he's struggling from. And for me, most of the time has been the right hash where he's dealt with the most issues. This ball was on the left hash. It was a 51-yarder where he's been really, really good over the course of his career for the Bills. And it goes off to the side. I tweeted immediately like, man, this is rising up the list of concerns. The Bills, Sean McDermott said it earlier this week, there's only one guy that they're ruling out for the start of the season right now, and that's Matt Milano, which is good news. But, man, if you're going to be in some tight games and you have Tyler Bass, who you don't – Brandon Beane said before the game today on Buffalo Kickoff Live, they believe in him. Sean McDermott has said that he's confident in Tyler Bass. But his play isn't backing up that confidence from the Bills' decision makers. And the problem here, though, is, Ryan, there's no out to this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler Bass is under contract. If you were to cut him this year, I think it comes with some kind of crazy debt. I don't have the number right at my fingertips right now. It's a crazy dead cap number this year. There's a little bit of it next year as well. That's what happens when you get yourself into a long-term commitment with a specialist. I mean, if things start to go awry and you don't have even the Kansas City Chiefs to a degree, I thought that was a little bit puzzling why they would invest that heavily in Harrison Butker, who at times has had his own little spats of inconsistency. Whenever you make that a long-term thing, and I guess to keep a kicker, you have to give him a long-term deal, but I would just, I don't know, draft one, have it play out, let him sign somewhere else, and then draft another one again.
When it comes to Tyler Bass, the Bills are in a tough spot because when you look out there at the market now, there's inconsistent kickers that are available or guys that are available because they couldn't land a spot on one of the other or any of the 32 NFL teams out there. So you're not getting a better option right now. You're not going to get a better option at roster cutdown day. The only way that this thing comes to a head this season, Matt, is if in games these struggles continue They cost the Bills a few games. At that point, I think that then they would have to maybe be forced into a change, eat a little bit of that dead cap, and move on from Bass. But, the problem right now is there are no better options available. The Bills kind of have to hope that he's going to be able to work through this, figure things out, which easier said than done. We've talked about this before. Kickers are so unique. When it could be 3 years, it could be 10 years, it can be 12 years. When they lose it, though, they just seem to lose it. And I don't know if it's the confidence. You don't know what it is, but it's been a roller coaster for him. And, that missed kick in the playoffs against Kansas City, the up and down summer, this past week being, missing more than making it felt like at practice, missing the long kick here. It's great that he was 6 for his first 6 in the preseason, but a lot of those were gimmies, ones that all NFL kickers should make. The Bills need to have a guy that they can count on for those long kicks, but right now there's just no one that is sitting out there that's a better option. So until push comes to shove, the Bills are going to stick with Tyler Bass. Now, could they add a guy to their practice squad? 100%. But there's no one right now, like I said, that's going to push Bass off this roster.
So it's $7.38 million dead cap hit if they cut him this year, which is insane. Like they're not gonna hold that dead cap figure for a kicker. And then even push it to next season, Ryan. He's on the books for a $4.67 million cap hit. And if they were to cut him, they'd have to eat $3 million of dead cap for a kicker. I mean, that is some huge numbers. It then dwindles down to 2026. It would only be $2 million in dead cap, but still $2 million dead cap. They gave him a contract thinking this is a long-term investment in a player. And I think that's why the rhetoric has been what it's been from the Bills, even through the struggles here, is like, listen, we have no choice but to be confident in the guy.
Right. You can't come out and be like, well, we don't have any confidence in this guy, but we're stuck with him. I mean, what's that going to do for you and for the team? Nothing good. So they're going to show confidence. They're going to say all the right things about this guy. After his rookie year, he had 2 straight seasons where he was converting about 87% of his field goal attempts. So you understand why the contract came, why the extension came. They probably thought that they had a guy that they could count on long term, but you saw it dip again last season and his struggles throughout the year. You saw how the playoffs ended for Buffalo and this summer. They're going to say all the right things, but I'm sure that they're probably feeling the same way that a lot of Bills fans are feeling right now. And there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of, can we trust this guy to make a big kick in a moment if we need him to do so?
From Sean McDermott after the game, those are ones he's got to make when asked about the missed 51-yarder. He knows that. Looked like it faded a little bit to the right. That's a kick he's going to practice a million times this week, but that's one that we got to have. So, the heat around Tyler Bass is going to get hotter and hotter as we get into the season, and it'll be a storyline that we continue to track. But again, I don't think it's something that's going to change. Now let's get into I just don't think that it's a situation that can change. Let's get into some other players that we feel like are on the roster bubble and that we really had kind of circled going into this game. I think the best place to start is Tyrell Shavers. I had him on my 53-man roster. He did nothing to push himself off of the 53-man roster. The biggest reason for me is why he's making this team is because the Bills are so banged up at wide receiver. I mean, you have Curtis Samuel, you have Marcus Valdes-Scantling, but their status for week 1 is still up in the air, even though Sean McDermott is hopeful that they can be back. If one or both can't play, you have a big problem there. And so I think that Tyrell Shavers is probably going to make the team just based on the wide receiver picture. And then you just take the totality, the whole picture of the last 4 months, starting with the draft process and Brandon Beane shouting him out and being a guy that they've really valued. That is out there. So maybe that's one big inside job by the Bills to try to keep people off of the trail of Justin Shorter. But I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Justin Shorter has been about as underwhelming as you can get this summer and this spring. I think Tyrell Shavers had a really nice game today, played for a quarter, got a couple targets, couple catches. He wants that catch in the end zone, which I think would have totally put him over the edge. I mean, Scott says that in the comments here, says it's a cut for him now because he dropped the touchdown. I thought if I'm DiNucci, if that's Josh Allen throwing that ball, that's a catchable ball, a little bit more of a catchable ball. He's going from the move that he put on the DB, he came to a complete stop and then absolutely exploded to get back to full speed to try to run down that ball. And I just think it was a little bit too far. But, man, at the same time, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, and I know people hate when people do this. I do that kind of think he should have caught it. Like, he had his one arm outstretched. We killed Keon Coleman for that last week. I think that, like, he makes that catch, and I feel like he puts an exclamation point on it. But I go back to my original point, and there just being a situation in that room right now where I think they're going to need some numbers.
So, first and foremost on the would-be touchdown, the move itself was filthy. They're going to look back at that tape. They're going to love the double move. They're going to love how wide open he was. I think there's some blame on DiNucci and there's some blame on Shavers on the play itself. So I think, for how wide open Shavers was, DiNucci could have delivered a better ball. I think that also Shavers, though, slowed down a little bit at the end of the route, and that kind of cost him with the timing to go get that ball. It was a fine throw. It could have been better. It was a great route that he just didn't finish. So some blame on both ends, but he made two other catches. He had one play where he was targeted where DiNucci couldn't get around the defender, tried to kind of squeeze it in there, and it was behind him. Overall, I thought he did really well in offense. He had a nice rep on special teams where, he fought through two defenders as best he could to get downfield. That he has that special teams acumen as well for this roster. He's outplayed MVS completely from this summer now. So I have no, problem saying he should be wide receiver number 5 on this team. Now, again, Buffalo has said MVS was the last receiver to kind of join the roster. He's still learning. He's dealing now with this injury. They've built in a lot of excuses for him. But if we're looking at the whole body of work, Shavers has definitely outplayed MVS. And in my opinion, his position is that wide receiver number 5 that you probably do give a game day jersey to because he can also contribute on special teams.
If you're Brandon Beane right now, how much, and it'll be interesting to hear him talk on Tuesday, and maybe some of this will come up. What is your overarching feeling about the wide receiver position based on what we've seen this summer? Because you have Khalil Shakir, who I think has got you feeling pretty secure with that guy as one of your big 3. You got Mac Hollins, who's pushing to be part of that big 3 most of the summer, which I think in its own way is kind of like a little bit worrisome. And maybe he's going to be a completely different player in this Bills offense and almost be like the, supercharged version of that one season in Philadelphia we've talked about. Fine. Curtis Samuel, already banged up, dealing with an injury. He's had some injury issues over the course of his career. Keon Coleman, it's been well documented, the areas of his game where he struggles and the inconsistency of MVS. It's great that he's got these big performances in the playoffs, Ryan, but that you got to make the playoffs before you can have big performances in the playoffs. And, right now, as you look around this room, I'm as bullish still today as I sit here on Dalton Kincaid as I was back in May. But if there's not enough weapons around him, is he at a place in his career to be that Travis Kelce-like number 1 option where you're being dependent on not only to carry the load week in and week out, produce week in and week out, but also stay healthy for a 17-game schedule while carrying that load on your back? I don't know. It's a lot on Dalton Kincaid, I feel like, with the way that this roster has been built.
Yeah, I think Buffalo went into this season wanting to make Kincaid their number 1 weapon. And regardless of that being the plan or not, that is a lot on his plate because he is a young player. He's entering year 2. You don't know how health is going to work for players in this league. You hope he stays healthy. To expect him to be Travis Kelce level already, I can't say that he's going to be there in year 2. I think as the season goes on, though, you're going to see some huge performances from him. But in terms of the Bills' receiver room itself, it's kind of a incomplete grade, I guess, after the preseason because you didn't see much from Keon Coleman during the preseason. You have Curtis Samuel banged up, trending in a good direction to play. Khalil Shakir, absolutely nice training camp. Stood out in the preseason game where he played with Josh Allen, looked the part. But there's so many pieces that you just don't know. You don't know what you're going to get out of Matt Collins. He had a really good year in 2022 with the Raiders. He showed that he could be a contributor in the passing game. He can block well. But if he's going to have as big of a role as the Bills are kind of, leaning toward, I want to see that for the Bills with Josh Allen before I can put my stamp on having the utmost confidence in him. And then MVS, like you said, it's been a very disappointing summer. He has not done anything of note consistently. He's had those bad drops in 7 on 7, 11 on 11 versus air. You can't have that, especially if you're going to count on this guy to be your field stretcher and make big plays down the field from time to time. So it's kind of incomplete after Khalil Shakir. And, I get that worry if you're a Bills fan, but at the same time, Buffalo went into this preseason showing absolutely nothing on offense. Joe Brady is going to have a plan in place come week 1 against the Cardinals. And, you kind of have to have that faith that he had his hand in this wide receiver room and he feels good about the weapons that Josh Allen has.
Yeah, and we might get into the season and all of the angst amongst Bills fans at the wide receiver position might be, for naught. Like we might get into the season, they could get things rolling, and people are like, Bean looks brilliant for the way that he's remade this thing and brings a little bit of balance, like what we talked about. I just also want to prepare for the fact that the way that it's been constructed isn't going to work, right? Like there's so many people over the years that set a blueprint for how things are to be done. And so many people try to emulate it. I mean, Tom Brady and the New England Patriots for decades, right? Teams trying to like build their organization the way that they did. And it's hard to replicate it in every single way. And it feels like the Bills are trying to completely replicate the way the Chiefs have done things. And it was hard for the Chiefs last year. I know they won a Super Bowl, but that defense was top 5. It was absolutely one of the top units in the league throughout the season and into the playoffs. And I just don't know if the Bills defense is going to be that this year. I don't know. The closer we get to the season, the more questions I have about this team. And I think more of it is about this roster not being what it was a year ago. And because of that, not being able to withstand some of the injuries that I feel like they were able to withstand last year and still compete. The reason I bring up the whole receiver situation is because what do the Bills do if it's like, Tyrell Shavers isn't good enough? Let's keep the 5 that we have and then maybe look to pivot, go outside, after, even before Tuesday or after Tuesday, and maybe look to make a Jahad Dotson-esque trade with a team that's looking to offload a wide receiver here. I know Treylon Burks is a popular name Bills fans have been talking about. I don't know if he's necessarily the best fit, but what are your thoughts about potentially looking at the market and seeing if there's a receiver outside that you could add to the mix at this point? Or do you think they would have done that already?
I think they've already probably done due diligence if that's something that's in their mind. It's just hard for me to imagine them bringing someone in that would be able to make an impact right out of the gate for them. Because if they do go that route, whether it's adding a cut wide receiver, trading for a guy, they need some time to get up to speed on this offense or on defense. If it's a defense player, you get the gist. You can't just throw players out there, no matter how good they are, in my opinion, and just expect them to contribute. But I look at a trade like the John Dotson trade. I'm not giving up a 3rd and 2 7ths for a guy that I thought in year 2 took a step back. He played inside, outside. He played 5 more games, and the stats didn't really grow that much. I don't think he moves the chain or moves it anything for a team adding him. I think he's a nice additional piece with the Eagles. But you look what the Eagles have in front of him. You look at that offense as a whole, with Saquon Barkley, with the 2 receivers, with, Jalen Hurts and the way they operate around him. He's just a complementary piece, in my opinion. The Bills would need more than a complementary piece to come in if they were looking that route. I just don't see that happening. I think that, like I said, they're going to let the chips fall where they may, and they have this utmost belief that between the backs on this roster, the tight ends on this roster, and the receivers on this roster that it's enough for them to win. Like you say, kind of replicate that Kansas City Chiefs model, replicate the Green Bay Packers model where you don't need a true number one receiver and you can still move the ball. They have Josh Allen at the end of the day. And when you have a franchise quarterback, they generally elevate the play of the players around them. We've already seen that. Stephon Diggs, great player in his own right, but had his best years here. Cole Beasley, John Brown, Robert Foster had his one cup of coffee because of Josh Allen. These guys have all been better off because of Allen. So I think he's going to try to get the same kind of results from your Curtis Samuels, from your Keon Colemans and Matt Collins, and expect Khalil Shakir to take that next step. And obviously Dalton Kincaid to take a big step in year 2.
I was expecting a little bit more from Zack Davidson this preseason. I think the fact that he didn't have the kind of preseason I thought was possible probably makes the Bills comfortable with cutting him and chancing it and trying to get him back on the practice squad. Talking to him in the locker room after the game today, he's talking about the fact of how happy he is that he got through this entire preseason. Still feels like he's building back from that ACL injury. And so he's taken all the positives off of that. He had this really nice summer. He made a lot of big plays in the practice situation. I think he's built a lot of equity within the building. But I think Davidson's a guy that it's just too hard of a fit because of the lack of special teams upside. Morris might be banged up right now, but if he has a chance to play week 1, and even if he doesn't, I don't know if necessarily the fix for that is Davidson. I think it's more like leaning more heavily on Reggie Gilliam, perhaps, as that third tight end.
Yeah, listen, I was very high on Zack Davidson all summer long. You know that. I don't feel like he did enough this preseason. I know he had 4 catches today. There were no yards after catch. There were no broken tackles. There was nothing that stood out to me and said, this guy has to make the 53-man roster. And, Quentin Morris, no one's been ruled out for week 1 minus Matt Milano. So you think he's at least trending toward the possibility of playing. And unless it's a longer-term injury where they would put him on one of those IR spots, which, again, there's no indication that is the case, that would be Davidson's path to making the 53, in my opinion. If it's might miss 1 or 2 games, then like you said, you roll into the season with your top 2 tight ends, and then you have Reggie Gilliam, who obviously works with the tight ends a lot, can run the route, is that fullback role, can kind of pull double duty as that fullback tight end number 3 type of role. I think Davidson is a priority practice squad player as long as he clears waivers. But no, not enough, in my opinion, for him to make this final roster.
In the comments, Roy Collins asking if I'd keep McKitty over Davidson if given the choice. McKitty had a nice catch today, but no, I wouldn't do that. I mean, everything that we saw this summer, I feel like Davidson's a tier, maybe 2 tiers above offensively what McKitty brings. I mean, a lot of drop passes throughout the summer. Just a guy that's never really entered the conversation or gotten himself on the radar, although that was a really nice catch that he made today. All right. One guy that we had to talk about here, Ryan, like what happens with Justin Shorter? I mean, this is just another wasted summer for a former 5th-round pick. Are we to the point yet where we're really thinking that this could be the next Marquez Stevenson, who's playing in the XFL here coming up for its next season or whatever other league comes about? Or do you think his athleticism will get him another opportunity? And if he gets cut and doesn't get claimed, do the Bills bring him back to the practice squad and continue to try to develop, or have they seen enough over a year and a half to maybe cut bait?
I think he gets one more shot on the practice squad to develop, and maybe that's Buffalo selfishly not wanting to give up on a draft pick too soon or be proven wrong about a draft pick. He had the mold, he had the size, the look of an NFL wide receiver, but despite being one of the top high school prospects back in the day, it never transitioned for him in college, and obviously has not worked for him in the pros. He's had some nice special teams moments, but you need a lot more than that, in my opinion, at this point, for him to be worth even keeping on the practice squad. But that said, I think the Bills maybe keep him around the practice squad one more year to try to see if there's anything whatsoever to that game to show what he can do. But no, I mean, unfortunately, this does look like a bad draft pick at this point in time. There were opportunities for him going into this summer for him to make a statement, to show that he belonged on this roster at wide receiver, to have some kind of role. And he did nothing to do that at the wide receiver position. Struggles to create separation, just inconsistent as can be. That doesn't cut it for, this roster, any roster for that matter in the NFL.
If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Hit that like button, as a few of our fans have said in the comments here. We really appreciate that. Subscribe to the channel as well. We're coming to you from inside Highmark Stadium. Ryan's back in Olean, talking about some of the big performances from today. And I think, we'll get to the defensive side of the ball in a second, because I think we got to talk a little bit about Andreessen. And I felt like a little bit more of a tipping the scales back a little bit in terms of his performance today. Now, I will say on Andreessen, and we'll get to him in a second, I don't want to go all the way there yet. Remember the fact that he was playing with all the other starters last week when he started having the success that he had. I think playing with third stringers pretty much for the majority of this game, it looked like it out there, right? So he, in a situation where he's playing in front of Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones, it looked a lot different than when he's playing in front of Rondell Bothroyd and Eli Anku, and rightfully so. So we'll get into that in a second. But Frank Gore Jr. came out here today, ran for 100 yards, had a touchdown, got to celebrate it with his dad in the stands. Such a cool story. There's no path to the roster for Frank Gore Jr., but to me, he's a priority practice squad guy. I think the Bills are going to have to cut Darrington Evans, whether it be for the hamstring injury or the fact that they just don't have enough room on the roster. And it's a shame, because Evans just has never been able to find a home in the NFL. He's a really nice player with, I think, a lot of juice. I mean, he showed it today on the touchdown to get the Bills in the end zone for the first time this preseason. He's been good for them 2 preseasons in a row, and he's landed on rosters time and time again. It's just he's always the odd man out in a running back situation, and it's that way again.
I think both guys showed that they are worth practice squad spots today. We don't know the severity of the hamstring injury, though, for Evans. We don't know the severity of the knee injury for Gore Jr. Gore Jr. getting up on his own, trying to kind of run on the sidelines, walking off at the end of the game, all encouraging signs. But until we know the severity of those injuries, you're right. It could be a wave injure type deal for a guy like Evans, possibly. So that said, though, I liked what I saw out of both guys. With Evans, the catch out of the backfield, the burst, the speed, the return ability. There's a lot there that I like about his game. But Gore Jr. impressed me, Matt. Going into this summer, I thought, undersized guy, worth bringing on as a UDFA. Don't get me wrong, but I thought he had an uphill climb to prove he was a NFL type caliber of player. He showed me he is today. He had some really nice runs. I think another year of development on the practice squad will benefit him. And then you kind of see where he's at next year, because Ty Johnson might not be part of the picture at that point. He could be in a role for that running back 3 job. He had an excellent performance today, rushing over 100 yards. In the first half, I think he had over close to 7 yards per carry, still finished like as 18 for 101 with a touchdown, I believe. So great performance by both of those backs today, who had to carry play a large role because they were the only backs that actually played on offense. Ty Johnson had a kick return, but didn't factor into the offensive game plan.
All right, let's shift gears here. And if you're watching on YouTube, like I mentioned, hit that like button, subscribe as well. If you want, become an insider, a Shout Buffalo Bills insider by texting 716-528-6727. We'll have you covered all the way up through roster cut down and then on to week 1 of the season. We're super excited to ramp that thing up. We're super active during the week on the insider text line. which is brought to you by Carrie C. Beyer, attorney with the law offices of Francis M. Litro, located at 237 Main Street in Buffalo, New York. If you or someone you know is seriously injured, give Carrie a call, 716-852-1234, or check out litrolaw.com. All right, on Andreessen, on the defensive side of the ball, he ends up finishing second on the team in tackles with 8, none for a loss. So, I saw a comment in here mentioning the lack of shooting gaps and being a factor in the backfield. And I think it's hard when you're playing with the level of competition or level of play teammate wise that he was playing with this week. I don't think that that's an excuse, but with this tape now for the Bills, do the Bills think, okay, we can keep like a guy like Dion Jones and Nick Morrow on the 2 veterans on the roster, cut Andreessen and get him back on the practice squad? Or do you think because of that singular one game, if you cut him, he's likely gone and the Bills aren't willing to risk that? And a shout out to my Buffalo Kickoff Live teammate, Tim Graham, who mentioned he had 2 tryouts. One was with the Bills, one was with the Chiefs.
Yeah.
So if he gets cut and the Chiefs want to make some room for him, we could have a much less publicized version of the Xavier Worthy situation.
He comes in, doesn't sign anywhere as a UDFA, and he gets the 2 workouts. Buffalo, KC. So KC saw the athleticism in terms of his testing numbers, probably some film from UB. Everyone saw his performance with the starters last week against Pittsburgh. I don't think the Bills are in a spot where they can try to waive him and get him on their practice squad. I think you need to absolutely get him on your 53-man roster at this point in time. Now, that said, today, you made a great point. He was playing with third stringers, and it looked like it at times. He and Dion Jones had a miscommunication on Carolina's first touchdown. And we'll find out more on that, I'm sure, soon. It does seem like it was Andreessen that made the mistake. Probably should have switched off with Jones on that play. Over pursued on one run play early on, but he had the athleticism to adjust and make a play there. Who you're playing and lined up next to matters in this league, and it was night and day. I still think he made some nice plays today. I think he's done enough. Nicholas Morrow has been injured a lot, has not done much with his opportunity here. Dion Jones, I thought, had a very rough outing. I'll wait and watch, before I say that with 100% certainty. He slipped on a route early, just struggled, I thought, looked a little bit slow out there. I think that when you look at this roster and where they're at in terms of injuries and everything else, Andreessen has to have a spot on this 53-man roster at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think Dion Jones's lack of level of play this whole summer is what leads me to pushing Andreessen harder, and what I think would push anybody pounding the table for Andreessen in the Bills meeting rooms. Because, Dion Jones is a guy that I think you put on the tape if you're a pro personnel guy around the league, and you're like, all right, if he's out there, like maybe it's worth a check-in if we really need some depth. But I think you could cut him and put him in that A.J. Klein department because he's an older guy, not as old as A.J. Klein was last year, but somebody that I think just has underperformed. And part of that is probably getting used to the defense. It's probably much different than the defense that he's played the last couple of years. I get all that. But don't forget, too, Morrow was the first guy that they tabbed in free agency as a guy to go out and grab. So I think even though he's been banged up, he's somebody that I think that they want to be a part of their plan. Him and Mike Edwards are in a similar bucket. And I think, Brandon Beane was on One Bills Live, and he was kind of talking about the decision that they have to make. A lot of it is projection with some of these guys. Like, okay, if they're going to be back, we know that we could trust them because of what they put on tape last year and the work we did on them in the offseason.
Yeah, 100%. And when you just talked about the A.J. Klein type of linebacker, whether you're talking Nicholas Morrow, Dion Jones, there's going to be a boatload of veteran-type linebackers that are going to be out there on the market after Tuesday at 4 p.m., in my opinion. Teams want to develop and bring along younger players, and that leads to some of these vets getting cut across the league. So I think the Bills are willing to roll the dice on a Dion Jones who didn't do, enough this summer, up and down play. Nicholas Morrow, who missed time with injuries. And I see Sheila here saying I didn't want to eat crow. I'm still where I'm at with Joe Andreessen. I'm not saying 100% roster lock. I'm saying if I were the Bills, I would put him on the roster, though, because, right now, in my opinion, it might come down to him versus Balin Spector. And as much as I like Balin Spector on the field, he can't stay healthy and can't stay on the field. So I'm going with the younger option, the upside of it, and then over those other veterans that I mentioned too, where there's going to be a lot of players like that available come Tuesday afternoon after all the cuts are made.
Thank you so much for watching Shout on this Saturday evening. The Bills finished out the preseason with a 31-26 loss to the Carolina Panthers. Result irrelevant, as we are now 2 weeks away, a little more than 2 weeks away from the start of the regular season. Bills versus Cardinals. We will be right back here. You going to be at that game, Ryan?
I'm going to be there week 1.
Woo!
Yes.
Big time, buddy.
Cannot wait. Look, as many of those 1:00 games as possible, I'm going to try to get to this year. Obviously, when it comes to those primetime games, a little bit tougher when I have to get up at 5 in the morning, and that commute back from Orchard Park to Olean is not ideal. So really looking forward, though, to being there week 1, Matt.
All right. 1402 Millersport Highway, Wingnuts next week at this exact time. That's where we will be. Make sure you get out there to hang with us, eat some delicious wings, drink some great beers. Or whatever. They got drink specials too, Ryan. It's not just beer. I shouldn't always say that. We cannot wait. We are going to officially kickstart the season with the live show. We can't wait to see you guys all out there. Have a great rest of your weekend. We'll be back likely on Monday with our final show before roster cutdowns. We cannot wait. For Ryan, I'm Matt. See you then.